Now, the president, as you know, is facing a series of court rulings on deportations, including a unanimous one from the Supreme Court that he must facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was wrongly deported to El Salvador, without the due process which is guaranteed to everyone in this country under the Fifth Amendment. Now, the term due process basically means ensuring people are treated fairly and their rights are protected and the government follows correct procedures when dealing with someone in a case. And though officials, attorneys, and courts are constantly defining and redefining just what due process means in any particular case, it seems the president has doubts or is unsure about the entire concept of it. Here he is over the weekend on NBC's Meet the Press.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says
I don't know.
It
seems it might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials.
Well, keeping them honest, that's not actually accurate. Migrants typically get hearings, not full trials, and they're handled by an immigration court, not the regular criminal court. Due process for migrants could simply be a brief hearing before a judge or magistrate, the kind that a bipartisan immigration bill called for funding many more of. The president, as you know, made sure that bill died on the vine during the campaign. In any case, the Constitution is clear on this. According to the Fifth Amendment, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's the Constitution. Again, you can argue over just what constitutes due process, as lawyers and judges have over generations, but saying I don't know to the entire notion is not really an option for the President of the United States. It would be as if the president said that he didn't know he needed to uphold the Constitution, which is what he did go on to say, actually, just a second later in answer to a question from Kristen Welker.
But even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said.
That was not a hard question. Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president of the United States? This country's founding document. I don't know, is what he said, which is weird because he had a chance to say those same words, I don't know, just a few months ago with his right hand in the air, as did his vice president and everyone in his cabinet. Listen to this and see if you hear anyone saying, I don't know.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
I, Tulsi Gabbard, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
that I will support
And defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
They all seem to know that was the job. Seth Moulton took a similar oath when he was sworn in as Democratic congressman from Massachusetts. I spoke to him just before air. Congressman, the president won't commit to upholding the Constitution, but also says he relies on his lawyers and that they'll obey the Supreme Court. How do you reconcile that?
You don't reconcile it. Trump has never agreed to follow the Constitution. And you just have to understand this. Look, you as an American voter can support Donald Trump, but you can't support Donald Trump and the Constitution. He forgot his oath the minute he took it. And it's the same oath, by the way, that I took as a United States Marine, that every veteran has taken an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Imagine if you went up to an Army private and said, do you actually intend to uphold your oath? And he said, I don't know. Or you went up to a police officer on the street and said, hey, you just got sworn in as a police officer. Are you going to uphold the law? And he said, I don't know. That's what the President of the United States is telling everyone in the world today.
I mean, in your mind, I assume some will argue, well, look, he was trolling his critics or he was just, you know, sort of batting away the question by saying, I don't know. You actually believe he either doesn't know or isn't interested in upholding the Constitution?
No, I don't believe that he doesn't know. I believe that he's not interested, that he's not interested in upholding the Constitution. He's not interested in upholding the law.
Do you believe the due process clause of the Fifth Amendment applies to all individuals physically inside the borders of the United States as opposed to citizens only?
That's what everyone has said, you know, and that's what the Constitution is pretty clear about. And it could be that everyone before us was wrong, Anderson. Every president was wrong. Every member of Congress was wrong. And Donald Trump is just so brilliant that this guy who went around the country bankrupting casinos just got constitutional law better than the rest of us. Or it could be that Trump is not following the law. Based on his history, based on his criminal history, which do you think is the case?
We just did a story earlier tonight about the president's cryptocurrency ventures. Not only is he a major cryptocurrency seller and will be profiting, and his family members as well, his entire family it seems, he's also running the government that regulates it. How big a concern do you think this is? Because I feel like it hasn't gotten a lot of attention until recently.
No, it hasn't gotten a lot of attention, Anderson, because he's doing so many other bad things that are potentially even more dangerous. In this case, he's just profiting off of his position, something that under any other president would have been a huge cause for alarm. Of course, this is exactly the charge he made against Biden, even though he could never substantiate it. But the reality is that Trump and his family are profiting seriously off of this. And I think that over time we're going to see that this is a very corrupt administration, not just a lawless one. It's just that when he's actually breaking the laws and putting people's lives in danger, it's an even more urgent concern, and that's why that's the focus right now.
I want to ask you about the Turkish student at Tufts University taken into custody by mass plainclothes officers on the street in your home state of Massachusetts going back in March. She's still being detained. It's believed to stem from an op-ed she co-wrote in a student newspaper urging the school to divest from entities with ties to Israel. Now, an appeals court panel, they're scheduled to hear arguments about her status tomorrow. Do you know anything more about her fate?
No. And we've been asking a lot of questions, the delegation in Massachusetts. So many people who are concerned about her and concerned about everyone else who might write an op-ed someday disagreeing with the Trump administration and could find themselves whisked off the street. If you look at this video, Anderson, it doesn't look like something that could happen in America. It looks like a video from China or North Korea or Iran. But that's the streets of America. And that's the country that Donald Trump is trying to make for all of us.
Joining us now, Lawrence Tribe, constitutional law professor at Harvard Law School and co-founder of the American Constitution Society, which is a liberal law and policy organization. Professor Tribe, thanks for joining us. What do you make of the fact that President Trump seemed stumped on this question of whether or not he has to uphold the U.S. Constitution when it comes to due process rights for undocumented migrants like Garcia?
He can't possibly be stumped. You don't have to be a lawyer. All you have to do is be able to read. It says that all persons are entitled to due process. And it certainly says that all officials of the state and federal governments are bound to support the Constitution. It's as simple as that. He takes an oath to uphold it, and then he says he doesn't know if he has to uphold it. That's totally ridiculous, and it's dangerous because it's trying to normalize the idea that he is outside and above the law. But nobody is above the law in this country.
We should note that the president said, and his staffers, his White House aides, point to the fact that he said that they're going to follow what the U.S. Supreme Court tells him to do. But so far, the Trump administration has been seeking ways to not follow the court's orders to facilitate, as they asked him to do, the return of the undocumented migrant Kilmar Abrego Garcia, saying its hands are tied because he's in El Salvador. Do you think we're going to see more cases like this where the administration presents its own interpretation of court orders to claim compliance?
I'm afraid so, because it's not just an interpretation. When the court says 9-0 that he's got to facilitate the return of Garcia, and then Stephen Miller, who, by the way, isn't a lawyer, says, "Oh, Mr. President, that doesn't mean you have to do anything," that shows that they can just turn the thing upside down. It's an Alice in Wonderland world where if they don't want to do what the Supreme Court tells them to do, they pretend the Supreme Court told them the opposite. That's not the world that any of us grew up in, and it's a world that is made for dictators. But this country is not ruled by a dictator. It's all very simple. And
So
it doesn't need a law degree to understand.
Yeah, and you mentioned White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, who's obviously very influential. He put out a definition of due process on Twitter or X this morning. He said, quote, "The right of due process is to protect citizens from their government, not to protect foreign trespassers from removal. Due process guarantees the right of a criminal defendant facing prosecution, not an illegal alien facing deportation," unquote. Response?
My response is that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Due process, as Justice Scalia said, protects all persons in the country, aliens, citizens, all persons. And if you say, well, it doesn't protect the people that the president thinks are violent criminals or illegals or whatever he wants to call them, that begs the question, who determines whether somebody is deportable? Who determines whether somebody doesn't belong here or is a violent criminal? Certainly not the president. He can't be judge, jury, executioner all at once. He's trying to take unto himself the powers of every branch of government, including now the judicial branch. He says basically due process is inconvenient. How can we have hearings for all these people? Well, that's all very nice, I guess. If you want to amend the Constitution and say that all persons are entitled to due process of law unless it would take too long to treat them fairly. That's not the Constitution that this country would ever agree to live by, and it's certainly not the one that this president swore to uphold on January 20th of this year.
Yeah. Professor Lawrence Tribe, thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
President Trump is saying out loud what so many people are thinking and daring anyone to stand in his way. The President of the United States openly questioning multiple times whether he'll abide by the founding document of our democracy, the U.S. Constitution.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Okay. That's true. Donald Trump isn't a lawyer. The topic there, more broadly, was about the man his administration admits to deporting by mistake. But did you catch that phrase, "I don't know"? That's been coming up a lot recently.
Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know.
I don't know. Let's just refresh. When you become president of the United States, promising to uphold the Constitution is quite literally the only thing you swear to do.
I, Donald John Trump,
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
the office of
President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution
of the United States.
Preserving, protecting, and defending the Constitution is the only thing you swear to do. Other federal officials, even the vice president, have to swear to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic, while also promising allegiance and affirming that they're doing it without any mental reservation, purpose of evasion, etc. You've heard it. The president, again, just one job: preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Of course, this all begged the question asked in the same interview of whether he might seek to violate the Constitution in a different, specific way. There is, of course, a constitutional amendment that limits presidents to 2 terms in office. So, does he plan to run for a 3rd term?
It's something that, to the best of my knowledge, you're not allowed to do. I don't know if that's constitutional that they're not allowing you to do it or anything else. This is not something I'm looking to do.
There's that phrase again. I don't know. Trump himself really kind of all over the place on this one. Maggie Haberman reported back in February that in private, the president says this is just one of many things he said to get attention and frustrate his opponents. Then 5 weeks ago, he told NBC, quote, "I'm not joking," when he was asked about potentially seeking a 3rd term. And there really seems to be no one in his inner or his outer circle that's saying definitively no, at least in public.
I think he's going to be finished probably after this term.
Probably.
Well, the Constitution, we'd have to look at the Constitution.
President Trump is going to run for a third term, and President Trump is going to be elected again on the afternoon of January 20th of 2029. He's going to be president of the United States.
But you don't really think he's running in 2028, do you?
I'll let the president speak to his political future.
Our Stephen Collinson put it this way, writing today, quote, Americans are learning what it's like to live with a president who sees no constraints on his actions and who apparently fears paying no price for them. Is this like that moment in Mean Girls? If you're my age, you'll remember this, when Lindsay Lohan wins the Mathletes tournament because she realizes that the limit does not exist. Is that America and President Trump right now? Except, you know, with stakes that actually really matter?
Attorney General Pam Bondi claimed that if not for Donald Trump seizing fentanyl at the border, 75% of all Americans could be dead. But hey, don't threaten us with a good time.
All right, my panel joins me now. Former policy director for Mitt Romney, Lanhee Chen, CNN contributor, New York Times journalist, podcast host Lulu Garcia-Navarro, Democratic strategist Adrian Elrod, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for being here. Lanhee, I want to start with you. You know, for our viewers, many of them know you well, obviously, but for those who don't, I mean, you have worked on the biggest policy questions for the biggest Republican presidential campaigns over many years. You've run for office yourself. You're working behind the scenes with those who might run in 2028. We don't know, I guess, if Donald Trump is going to be one of them or not. But this question of the Constitution, him simply saying, when asked directly, are you going to uphold the Constitution? Him saying, I don't know. What does that mean?
Well, first of all, I think that there were elements to these different questions, okay? The notion that he doesn't know if there's due process, he's not a lawyer, we'll take him at his word on that. I think that the bigger question and the bigger issue, of course, is what it means about the migration of the Republican Party. Because at one point, I do think this was the sort of pinnacle value for many Republicans, right? Defending and upholding the Constitution. And the reality is that there doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite within the Republican Party to distance oneself from any of this. Now, I do think, to be fair to the president, he was pretty clear, I think, in that clip, that he wasn't going to pursue a third term. That's what I heard.
More clear than he has been in the past.
More clear than he's been at any point before.
Yeah.
So I do think that that is something that, you know, I would not put that in the same category as the rest of the clips that you had there in the opening.
Matt Gorman, how do you look at this?
I look at it actually in somewhat similar to Lonnie's point. I thought he was more definitive than I had ever heard him about 2028. I think people use that around him, at least definitively. Just try and get in the headlines and try and get in the news a little bit. They speak out in front of the president when it comes to 2028. He was pretty definitive, I thought, on that. And then on that first part, I watched it live and I read the transcript. And when the clip came initially, I'm like, that's interesting. And you read it, and his next line is, I'm going to respond by. I think it was more of a deflection. I don't know, in terms of the due process argument in terms of Abrego Garcia. Because in that same line, he also says, I'm going to follow the Supreme Court. I'm going to listen to my lawyers on this. So I don't think he was addressing the question, the philosophical one about upholding the oath of office. It was in terms of Abrego Garcia, due process, and the deportation back and forth.
Do you buy that?
I think the problem with the president is that we're constantly having to parse what he means. And it's this kind of like, do you think he means this? It's like this Rorschach test. If you're a Republican, you see, you know, it's all, you know, stars and stripes. And if you are a Democrat, they are worried and they see a demagogue. And that is the problem. He's never definitive. He's never clear. This I don't know that is constantly being used allows for a lot of interpretation. And then when he does something later, he says, well, I told you I was going to do it. And so this is the problem that constantly happens, I think.
Adrian?
Yeah, I completely agree, man. Look, here's the bottom line. I think we always have to take Donald Trump for his word. I mean, many of the things he said on the campaign trail, whether it's I'm going to restrict women's access to abortion or whether I'm going to enact tariffs or whatever it may be, those are the things he's actually done. That is the one thing I'll give Trump credit for. He says he's going to do something, and he does it.
Except lower prices, possibly.
Except for maybe lower prices. And
we may not be seeing that yet.
Often the things that he says are not things that we want to see enacted, which is one of the reasons why we ran against him. But the bottom line is this: his campaign's political action committee, whatever it is, they're printing 2028, Trump 2028 hats. You've got Steve Bannon, one of his big allies, surrogates out there, saying he's definitely going to run again. He's definitely going to win again. We have to take him at his word. And it's a shame, and it's a disgrace. You don't see more Republicans out there speaking out against this.
Let's look at a slightly longer version of what Trump had to say specifically on this third term question. Because, again, as our panel has astutely pointed out, we tied it together there. There's him saying he doesn't know if he's going to uphold the Constitution as part of the immigration deportation situation. And then there is this piece about his political future. And he did talk about other Republicans who may succeed him as well. Let's watch.
So many people want me to do it. I have never had requests so strong as that. But it's something that, to the best of my knowledge, you're not allowed to do. I don't know if that's constitutional that they're not allowing you to do it or anything else, but there are many people selling the 2028 hat. But this is not something I'm looking to do. I'm looking to have 4 great years and turn it over to somebody. You look at Marco, you look at J.D. Vance, who's fantastic. You look at, I could name 10, 15, 20 people right now just sitting here.
Matt Gorman.
I mean, you look at take him at his word, that's pretty definitive. I mean, he's talking about successors. He went on a extended riff about J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio in particular. One of the big takeaways from that interview was how definitive he was in 2020, how introspective he was on people who would be his successor. That was one of the few things I thought. First of all, I thought it was a very good interview. I thought it was a better interview for Trump than the ABC one he did last week. I thought Kristen Welker did a very good job. I think they came prepared. I thought it was a fair interview on both ends. And I thought that was one of the highlights of it.
I'm curious, though, because when he says it's not something I'm looking to do, you could then say, oh, everyone was asking me, and then I'm going to do it. I didn't want to, but, the people really want me to run again. I mean, again, I don't think it's as definitive as you're making it.
But it wasn't a line of not allowed to do. It was also, the agency was not just him. It was not something you're allowed to do.
I've also never heard him really muse about his successors either.
Yeah.
It's the first time when you hear him actually naming J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, whoever the 10 or 15 others are. We can have a little pool maybe afterwards about who those 10 or 15 are. But obviously, I do think, I thought this was pretty definitive, certainly more definitive than I've heard. And, he even talks about the 2028 hats because I'm sure he knew people would raise this as an issue. And he says, look, it's not something I'm looking to do. So I don't know, for me, fairly definitive, but.
The thing that I thought was super fascinating, though, is the raising the specter of Marco Rubio. There is not a lot of love lost, according to many people, between J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. There are very different groups within the White House who support the vision of both of those men, and it's sort of pitting them against each other a little bit. I thought was very Trumpian.
Well, we have two people who I'm interested in both of your takes on whether there's already a shadow primary going on between Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance on the Republican side.
I think it might be a little dramatic. I think we could be seeing the ticket, but let's be clear. I think J.D. Vance is in the catbird seat on this because he's the sitting vice president. However, I could tell you better. Working for Tim Scott, the former president of the United States was challenged in a relatively competitive primary. JD would be too if he decides to run.
Look, every politician at the end of the day, when they reach that level, would love to be president, I'm sure. And I think either Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance would be fantastic presidents. But the reality is that right now, they're serving the president of the United States.
Right.
And they're focused on that.
A civics test. When presidents raise their right hands, they pledge to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. But Donald Trump is apparently keeping his options open.
Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said.
The exchange was over deportations and due process, which several judges have ruled Trump's actions are indeed unconstitutional. But this is a notable moment in politics, since for the right, for decades, they have made America's document the centerpiece of its governing and moral philosophy.
This is a pocket copy of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. I've spent 40 years of my life studying this.
Because I believe in this document written by the hands of wise men raised up by God to that very purpose.
The Constitution starts with the 3 most important words outside the Bible: we the people.
Didn't you take an oath to this, the Constitution of the United States? Doesn't this supersede everything else?
Our Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
Every decision that I make starts with asking the questions, is this constitutional?
This is not a prop, and I don't carry it as a prop.
Joining us in our fifth seat at the table is attorney Dante Mills. He is a law professor at Temple University. Dante, I don't think it requires a law degree to understand what the Constitution says. Is it just me? It seems like that's kind of a cop-out for just the plain text, which actually, if you're conservative, that is how they read the document.
The simple answer should be, I will follow the Constitution, especially if you're the president of the United States. But I want to have a logical conversation. And there's a quote that Donald Trump said. He said, I was elected to get them the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me back from doing so. That shows his rationale. He thinks that the courts are acting against him, but the court's job is not to advance or to fight against the presidential policy. It's to make sure that they interpret these laws with fairness. And the one thing the courts do that I think President Trump is missing here, the courts determine or look at, what if you're wrong? What if they're not a criminal? What if they're not a gang member? What if they're not an immigrant? They're an American citizen, and you put them in jail anyway, and all of that has happened. The impact of that far outweighs the time it would take to just have a hearing. And that's what due process is.
So here's the deal. We've let 20 million something people into the country illegally. And now what a lot of folks want to do is use the court system to try to stop as much as possible the rapid deportation of illegal aliens from the country. What the president said in the interview was very clear. He was unsure on these deportation cases because of the unusual circumstances, but he was going to defer to his brilliant lawyers and said, quote, we are going to follow what the Supreme Court says. There is no outrage here that's worth it. But we have been invaded by millions upon millions of people. And he was elected to get them out. He was elected to get them out. And what some people are proposing is a backlog system that will never allow us to go to get them out.
You're describing illegal immigration, which has been around for a long time as an invasion, which is fine for you if you want to do that. But why is that unusual that there's a process to go through to deport people? I mean, that's actually just how the system works.
Do you know how long it takes for this process, this paperwork to get people out? The guy that we've all been weeping and gnashing teeth over, the guy we sent to El Salvador, was in the country 14 years illegally.
But what about what
We've got
Dante's-
millions of people who have gamed this system, and now we're going to game it
Either you
some more.
believe in the Constitution or you don't.
I believe in the sovereignty of the United States, or you don't.
But
So you don't believe in the
believe in the Constitution?
I believe in the sovereignty of the United
So you
States,
don't
and I
believe
believe
in the Constitution.
we've
And
been
you don't
invaded.
believe that Donald
Can I
Trump
just ask a
should
question?
abide by the Constitution?
Just a serious question.
Of course I do. And of course I believe.
Do you believe that he does?
And I believe that he will follow, just as he said, what the Supreme Court says. But the policy debate is worth
From
having.
the very beginning,
millions
of Trump,
upon millions of
when
people are
Trump
here, and they will not
campaigning,
leave, and he has to get them
always
out.
I agree with you with
believed
that, Scott.
in executive
Hold on a
overreach.
second, Dante. Let me just let her
Always. From the very beginning, from 2016, he has believed in executive overreach. We've all seen that. He said it. It was clear. Are you saying now that you don't believe that he believes in executive overreach?
I believe that he believes his mandate from the American people is to solve illegal immigration. And I would ask you the same question in reverse. Did Joe Biden, when he said he would faithfully uphold and execute the laws of this land, not mean it when he decided to let millions upon millions of people into the country? Because he did not execute the laws.
I thought that you were going to squirm out of that question.
I'm not squirming.
Yes, you did. And that's why I prepared for it, because I want to read you something. At the core of Trump's candidacy is a call for greater executive authority with willful disregard for the constitutional limits placed on our chief executive. Trump especially promises to force individual companies to do things he wants them to do, or else he promises punishment to those who displease him, which appeals to the miserable man at the airport bar. Do you recognize that?
Yeah, I wrote it.
Exactly.
And here's
so
the deal.
He hasn't
And
changed,
here's
so
the
what has changed about you?
And here's the difference between then and now. This country has been invaded. The president was elected
So
to
you
end the
changed your
invasion.
opinion on the Constitution?
My opinion is the president needs to pull every lever he can to solve illegal
So
immigration.
you've answered that question by saying
here's
that
the
you don't mind
question.
him being
Do you
unconstitutional.
believe that every immigrant here is the same? You can't believe that because
Yes.
they're not. They're not.
I do.
There's some good, there's some bad. There's some criminal,
I
they're
believe,
not.
I believe
And how
everybody
do you-
who's here illegally
hear
is
this
here
out.
illegally.
How do
Not
you
all are
differentiate?
violent, but all are here
But
illegally.
how do you differentiate if nobody gets a hearing, if you don't have due process? How do you distinguish one from the other?
Well,
so what you're saying is every person that's here in this country is a criminal, is a gang member,
No.
should be thrown in jail.
Every person who's
That's
here
what's
illegally,
happening.
every person who is here illegally is in fact a criminal. Some of them do come here and commit violent crimes
Some of
and
them, but
still
how do you
aren't
differentiate
deported.
if you don't have a
Well,
process?
some have records and some don't.
But they
I'm
still
here to
have
break the news.
constitutional rights.
They're all going
hold on a
away.
second.
Still have constitutional
I want to make
rights.
sure that we're not straying from the point of this conversation, which is a question about due process rights. And So I'll just ask really quickly, do you believe that undocumented immigrants have to have due process rights, that that's constitutionally what they are entitled to?
I'm unsure of what that means in the context of some of the cases that we've been dealing with in the news lately, because I've been looking at these people who have been here for 14 years, have been through numerous immigration.
All right, well,
I have a question about what does that mean?
All right,
yes,
I
agree, but what does it mean?
Let me bring the Supreme Court into this since you brought them up. This is what 2 different Supreme Court justices have said about this issue in the past.
Do undocumented immigrants have the 5 freedoms? Oh, I think so. I think anybody who's present in the United States has protections under the United States Constitution.
The 14th Amendment, it doesn't speak of citizens, as some constitutions grant rights to citizens, but our Constitution says person. And the person is every person who is here, documented or undocumented.
Batya, I wonder why it's so difficult to understand a pretty simple concept. If Trump wants to deport illegal immigrants, he can do that, but he ought to do it legally. Do you think that that is a fair thing to say at this moment?
I do. I do think the media is pulling another, dictator for a day hoax right now, because it's clear when Trump said, I don't know, what he meant was what he finished his sentence saying, which is, I don't know where the Supreme Court is going to come down on whether deporting these illegal migrants is constitutional or not. It's very obvious, yet every single headline...
You just called it a hoax, so let's just play. Can we play it again in the control room, what Trump said in response to Kristen Walker? We're getting it up right now.
Can I make another clip? Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said.
What's wrong with that?
So the Supreme Court is going to decide what is constitutional and what is not, and Trump just committed 100% to following what the Supreme Court says. I want to make one more very quick point.
There's another clip. Do we have the other one where he talks about whether citizens deserve due process? If we do, let's play that one.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Well, the Fifth Amendment says
I don't know. It might say that, but if you're talking about that, then we'd have to have 1 million or 2 million or 3 million trials.
So can I respond to that?
Yeah.
So what does it mean for an illegal immigrant to have due process? We would all agree that they do not have the same level of due process that we do. For example, we are entitled to a jury trial, and they are entitled to a hearing before an immigration judge. Do you know who the immigration judges work for? They work for the executive branch. They work for which means that they work for Donald Trump, which means that he is in charge of the due process that they get.
But Donald Trump doesn't even want to give him even that due process.
I
think that's part of the problem.
He is not sure the level to which they are entitled.
She didn't ask about what level of due process.
That's a very basic statement.
No, I mean, the reason I'm jumping in here is because she did not ask him should they have a jury trial? Should they not have a jury trial? She just said whatever process they are entitled to. If they're immigrants and they're in an immigration proceeding, then yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a different type of proceeding. It's actually more of an administrative proceeding.
It's a much lower standard as well.
But still, even still, they are trying to circumvent that minimal amount of due process.